Our world has changed in an instant, as we've seen in Japan and here at home. The attention of the nation is focusing more intensely on families storing emergency food and water in their homes, and why. Potential disruption in the food supply can cause a number of factors such as unemployment, economic downturn, erratic weather, droughts, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, contamination of food supplies, and transportation disruptions. Building your food reserves for your family is one of the most prudent actions that you can take. Email Cindy at t2tn.com or call Eunice at 503-316-1220.
Good morning, Hebrew Nation Radio. What a pleasure it is to be with you today. My goodness, it seems like it's been such a long time since I've seen some of you. And, you know, I would have recognized you anywhere. You're beginning to look just like your father. If I didn't know any better, I would just swear that you're being conformed into his image. I assume that you must have been really digging in the Torah, because the more that you dig in the Torah, did you know you're going to become more and more like him? The more that you dig in the Word, the more that your DNA is going to be repaired so that you can become the express image of Yah himself. Isn't that powerful? It sure is. Well, a lot of things have happened since the last that I spoke with you, so come on in the room here, sit down, get yourself a good, comfortable spot. We have just got to talk. I would like to say that I'll not be able to be with you on tomorrow's broadcast live. We will have a pre-recorded broadcast, but I have one of my congregation members that's going through some difficulty. She had a hip replaced a few weeks back, and since that time, the joint area has broken again. So if you wouldn't mind, those of you listening, I would solicit your prayers, and I know that the family would as well. It's her name is Reuben, so please would you lift her up with us. Now, today, as we get ready to start looking into the subject that I'm going to share with you on this particular broadcast, it has actually to do with two specific Torah portions, last week and, of course, the one for this week. And the reason I'm putting the both of them together is that actually sometimes they are included together, but because we missed last week, I had a guest speaker come in, and I wasn't able to treat that Torah portion like I would have enjoyed. But anyway, what I want to do is begin to break these two Torah portions down and show you again what Father's trying to teach us, and to continue to build on what we were teaching last week on the broadcast. As I've alluded to previously, we know that the tabernacle was laid out in the form of a man, and of course that man is a representative, if you will, of our husband, Messiah. And the relationship that the priesthood and the people of Israel in company together as they came to the tabernacle to officiate in the sacrificial worship, and of course the interaction in the tabernacle is a representation of the bride. And so what we're seeing is a picture here of Genesis chapter 2, where Yahweh took the body of the Adam, and then he takes out of the Adam and forms the bride. And of course we know that ultimately that is going to be reversed, and we will see Eve put back into the bride one more time. And of course we're seeing that acted out naturally on a consistent basis, because the two of us are becoming echad, one. And that's what you saw every time you look in the Torah and you see the interaction there in the tabernacle. You're seeing the picture of the bride and the groom becoming one in that relationship known as the marriage relationship. And let me just make sure that you understand, I'm stipulating specifically for you that marriage is confined to the role of one husband, one wife, and of course anything outside of that, I think, compromises the Torah. Now, as we look at this particular combination of Torah portions this week, they're entitled Tazria and Metzora. And I'm going to break those two words down in the Hebrew language for you in a few moments. But as we do this, you're going to find that what's happening here is that you have a picture of Israel, who was redeemed in Exodus by the blood of the Lamb during the Passover redemption process. And of course we know that she's brought into a wilderness setting and should have taken an 11-day journey and crossed over into the promised land. Well, the word promised in Hebrew is the word dabar, and it is the Hebrew word for just that, word, meaning Torah, the word of the Torah. And what's happening here is that you're being shown a maturation process, and of course we know that they failed because of their sinful nature, and they're compromised initially at the golden calf incident, and some others, the 12 spies issue. Well, they wind up wandering for 40 years in the wilderness before that generation that was given to the flesh dies off, and the young generation was able or allowed to go into the promised land. Well, what's being shown in these Torah portions is a prescribed method, a determined prescription, a protocol, if you will, for you to approach Yahweh in the proper manner to allow you to deal with those things in your flesh that will keep you from having access to Him. How many of you know, back in Genesis chapter 3, what happened between Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve together represent the bride of Messiah. And of course, if you go back and look at Genesis chapter 3, you see that they have an encounter with the serpent, and shortly after that encounter, you see the voice of Yahweh, which I firmly believe was the manifest presence of Yahweh, the living word of Yahweh that walked in that garden, which would have been Messiah. Well, what happens when you look at that chapter 3, you'll find that from that point until where we are today, the bride has been in a compromised position, and there's only one way for you to be able to be sanctified and set apart, made holy for the purpose that Yahweh set you in the earth for, and that's to avail yourself of the atoning work of Messiah, who paid the penalty that you incurred, that your forefathers incurred back there in Genesis chapter 3. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at these particular Torah portions. Now, the first chapter, as a matter of fact, it begins in Leviticus chapter 12 and runs through chapter 15, verse 33. The first chapter deals with a woman who's in a state of nidah, which is another way of saying uncleanness. The interesting thing about that word nidah, if you were to break it down in the Hebrew language, you'd see it's comprised of a Hebrew letter known as the nun, which represents life, and the Hebrew letter dalet, which is a door. And if you put the two of them together, Nod, you should remember that that's the name of the place where Cain, in Genesis chapter 4, the land that Cain became a vagabond in, he was exiled, if you will, to the land of Nod, a place of wandering, where one who is driven to and fro, one who falters one way and then falls the other way, one who's given to the carnal passions, was exiled. Well, because of her uncleanness, the woman is given a specific method that she must adhere to if she's going to achieve ritual purity, a state of ritual cleanness where she can later approach her husband. Well, that's a figure, if you will, of how you and I, as the bride, could also deal with our unclean state. Well, the first chapter deals with how the bride, after she's given birth, how long she's to remain in that unclean condition. And then, of course, the next 3 chapters deal exclusively with certain blemishes, superficial blemishes, that you will see in the skin that could also lead to ritual defilement. And later, listen to this, if those ritual blemishes aren't dealt with, not only can you become ritually, ceremoniously defiled, but you can be found in a state where you are ultimately expelled from the camp if you're not healed. Now, let me just stipulate something for you. When these individuals contracted whatever these diseases were that caused the blemishes in their skin, they were given a specific method that they were to approach the priest with, and if they went by that prescribed cleansing method, then they could be healed and restored. What I want you to notice in this particular setting, you're going to find a picture of how the blemishes in your flesh, and when I'm talking about blemishes in the flesh, I'm talking about those things that cause us to become what we refer to as carnal believers or carnal Christians, one given to fleshly lustful appetites. If we're not careful, those superficial blemishes, if we don't do what's required in the Word to walk in a state of cleansing so that those spots and wrinkles can be removed, guess what? We will become ritually, ceremoniously defiled, where we're not able to come into the presence of Yahweh until those things are dealt with. And did you know that they were not allowed access into the presence of Yah, but they were also segregated from the rest of the people? You know, that would be a pretty good thing today. If individuals that were just really given to fleshly outbursts and carnal passions, if we would take them, and I know some of you may take exception to this, but if we would have them separated and segregated from the camp until they decided they're going to get their act together, it would eliminate quite a lot of issues in the camp. And I've got news for you. There's coming a day in front of us when we're going to be in a situation where calamity and persecution and things of that sort is going to force us to have to deal with certain matters like this, so that the entire camp is not compromised because of one individual's sin. And you may not think that your sin affects the whole camp, but if you go back and read what happened to Joshua and the children of Israel when they did battle with a little small city, one named Achan came in and brought sin into the camp, and it caused the entire nation to suffer. Well, your sin, although it may seem like it's just you involved, it has a ripple effect, and it will literally touch people and people's lives around you that you may not can see. Now, we're going to explore why Yahweh deals with these two Torah portions in the progressive order that he does, and we're also going to learn these two Hebrew words, Tazria and Metzorah. We're going to learn what they're associated with. One associated with the flesh, and we're going to also find out that it's associated with the tongue as well. Did you know? These Hebrew words are extremely powerful, and I would suggest that if you're not familiar with the Hebrew language, that you begin to get you a good biblical concordance so that you can take what you're studying back to the original Hebrew. And I would suggest that if you're not able to get a good Klein's Dictionary of the New Testament, that you at least get access to Hebrew word pictures by Frank Seekins or some of the other real basic documents that you can start with, because it will really help you. The Hebrew language is powerful. It's very picturesque. It has far more hidden meanings there than you'll ever begin to glean in just the English alone. What I'd like to do is to look at that word Tazria. If you were to break it down and look at the root of it, and if you have a good Strong's Concordance, you'll see it's Strong's number 2232. The root is the word zerah, and of course that is the word for seed. And it literally infers a sowing. It means to be sown, and if you look at it in the context of what we're talking about here, it's inferring one who's going to conceive seed or become pregnant. But as we've looked before, whenever you notice certain Hebrew letters attached to the end or to the beginning of a word in a prefix or a suffix type relationship, well, it can affect the meaning of that word. This particular word, zerah, has a tav, a prefix to the front of it. And when you see this tav, it's indicating future tense. In other words, you shall, they shall, she shall. And in this particular situation, it's indicating a future tense that's being associated to this bride who will one day become pregnant. She will receive seed. She will conceive in the process. Now let's look at that word Metzorah. And if you were, again, to look at it in the Hebrew language, the Strong's Concordance number that's assigned to it would be 6879, Sarah. And that word means to be diseased, to be leprous, to be struck down. And one more time, there's a Hebrew letter, the Hebrew letter Mem, and if you were to see it in its original form, it means from or out of, and it's indicating the source of origin of what follows. And if in this particular instance, Metzorah means from or out of leprosy. Now let's break it down even further. You can, if you're willing to look, you can see two specific Hebrew words within the one word, Metzorah. You can see the word zerah for seed, but you can also see the Hebrew word met, which is death. And so leprosy, even though we're talking about a physical disease, blemishes that affects the skin, it's a result of dead seed. Now, did you know that the sages, the rabbis teach that leprosy was a direct result of what is referred to as Lashon Hara, or Lashon Hara, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is the Hebrew rendering of the evil tongue? Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? Did you know that your tongue is an unruly member and has the ability to set on fire the entire course of nature, and it has life and death in it? You can, by your own tongue, release seed that produces life and will cause individuals to conceive from that seed, or you can release Metzorah, the dead seed, which will initiate superficial blemishes And if those superficial blemishes